Welcome to the Ironwood Strength Show, where the information is raw, unscripted, and unedited. Today, episode 11, I'm going to go over special exercise considerations. I touched on special exercises a few episodes ago when I went over SPP and SSP. SPP being special physical preparedness, which is where the special exercises should be categorized. Today, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and dig into kind of the applied or practical sense of special exercises, how you would use them, why you would use them, things of that nature. And this will be something that you could probably take information from and directly apply it to your training. So this is a very probably important episode as far as discussing special exercises and their uses and their benefits. First, we got to look back at what a special exercise is. Okay, what is it, and how do we define that, or how do we define a special exercise? So, special exercise. Remember, there's two different types of special exercises. Okay, from that previous episode, there's two different types. One is supplemental, one is developmental. The supplemental special exercise is one that really looks at the technique of the actual competitive exercise. It draws similarities from there, and it really mimics in many parts the kinematics of the competitive exercise. The developmental special exercise is more focusing on the musculature involved. And it's got to go a little bit deeper than that. So the developmental, a glute ham raise being so superior in developing hamstring strength, and properly conditioning the hamstrings, would be a special exercise for a squat or a deadlift. Okay, it would fall into that category because it's so great at increasing the strength of the hamstrings. When you increase the strength of the hamstrings utilizing glute ham raises, many times you'll see your squat or your deadlift go up just from increasing your strength in your glute ham raise. Okay, even though the motion is not very similar, the hamstring strength produced is useful, highly useful in the competitive exercises. Now you compare that to just a standard a single leg RDL. While maybe very useful, it does train the hamstrings. It's probably not going to benefit you very much, if at all, in developing your squat or your deadlift. From a bench press perspective, most extension exercises such as dips, skull crushers, flared arm extensions, a lot of people call that a Tate press, where you're doing extensions here with dumbbells. Those would all fall into developmental special exercises because they are very effective at increasing the strength of the triceps in a manner that would carry over to your bench. However, push downs, band push downs, would not have a significant carryover to your bench. Although a very beneficial exercise for different reasons, the direct carryover to your bench would be low, so that would not be considered a developmental special exercise. Okay, so that's the first way of looking at special exercises, is looking at the supplemental and the developmental. Okay, and categorizing those as such. Today, I'm mostly going to focus on the supplemental special exercises. Those that are mimicking the technique that should have a direct carryover to your squat, your bench, your deadlift, your clean, your jerk, whatever the case may be. The other thing you need to look at is the principles of dynamic correspondence. I talked about this before as well. And if you cannot satisfy the principles of dynamic correspondence, then it is not a special exercise. Okay, and that goes for any sport. You have to satisfy the principles of dynamic correspondence. There are 5 different principles. You don't have to satisfy all 5 principles to be a special exercise. But if you don't satisfy any of them, then it cannot be a special exercise. So number 1, I'm going to recap this quickly and then we're going to move on. We've went over this before, so I don't want to beat a dead horse too much, but I do think it is important to understanding what a special exercise is, so I do want to hit on it. Principles of dynamic correspondence. Number 1, the amplitude or direction of movement. Okay, the flexion versus extension. Okay, are your muscles producing the same action and your joints producing the same action as the competitive exercise? Okay, if they're producing the same action, then we're on the right step. Okay, it's not just that simple, but that's part of it. Range of motion. What's the range of motion of the special exercise? How many degrees do your joints travel through? Of the competitive exercise, I'm sorry. What's the range of motion of the competitive exercise? What are the degrees? How many degrees do your joints travel through? You don't have to know the exact degrees. Just look at it. Versus being a high board press, you might be right here. I'm trying to get a good angle on that with the video, but you might just be right here. That much range of motion versus a bench press going all the way to your chest and coming all the way back up is a much larger range of motion. Therefore, for a raw bench press, a 5 board press is not a great special exercise for the bench press. Doesn't mean it's not useful, but it's not a great special exercise because the range of motion with a 5 board would be far too small compared to the range of motion of the bench press. We are producing a lot of force, but it's in the very top part of the range of motion. Now, if you're utilizing a shirted bench or an equipped bench, that 5 board press may have more relevance because the assistance of the shirt in the bottom, you have to have a great amount of force developed at the top, or be able to produce a great amount of force at the top, because you're not going to get as much assistance from the shirt at that top part range of motion. That's why the 5 board press or the 4 board press would carry over much better to a shirted bench than to a raw bench. Okay, number 2, the accentuated region of force production. And I just talked about this with the board presses, comparing them to a shirted bench. Where in the range of motion is force production the highest? Okay, so we need to the special exercise should look at, or should take that into consideration. Can we produce more force in the range of motion, in the part of range of motion, than what we are utilizing in the competitive exercise, or similar force or greater force? The dynamics of the effort. I'm trying to look at these because I always have to look back at these. That's very similar to me to the accentuated region of force production. Probably looking at it kind of at a different scale, but where is the force produced? Are we producing force in the proper part of the range of motion? Is it explosive? Is it more slow? What are the dynamics of the effort? How does the lift move? Time and rate of max force production, the speed of it. Okay, is it a slow movement? And these are all related in a way for a reason. So this is related to what I just said about the dynamics of the effort. Is it explosive? Is it a slow lift? Is it a fast lift? Is it what is the total time produced? Louis Simmons used to always talk about strength is measured in time, not in pounds. So how long can you strain for on a max bench? If you can strain for 8 seconds, then you have a better chance of getting that lift versus if you can only strain for 3 seconds. If you can only strain for 2 or 3 seconds, you better be a very explosive, be able to turn that force production on very quickly and very fast because you don't have a lot of time to display force. If you can strain for 8 seconds, you can keep grinding and grinding and grinding until you finish that lift. Also the rate, how fast do you have to turn it on? A clean and jerk, a jerk being extremely explosive movement. You have to be able to turn that force on very quickly. So a military press or a standing overhead press, which I believe is very important to having the absolute strength for the jerk, although not by itself is not sufficient enough. But the speed of the lift, the rate that you produce force at would be much slower than a jerk. A jerk would have to be very, very extremely fast. The military press would still fit into a special exercise, but based on other means, not the rate and time of force production. Because the rate and time of force production for a jerk is so instantly fast that the military press or the standard overhead press just doesn't compare. There are other reasons to do an overhead press to develop maximum strength, but it would not fit under that rate and time of force production. And the regime of muscular work. Okay, today I'm going to be talking mainly about powerlifting. I'll tie in some weightlifting, but the regime of muscular work being, is it lactic? Is it alactic? Is it glycolytic? Is it, which glycolytic and lactic to me are essentially the same thing. Is it aerobic? For lifting, powerlifting, and weightlifting, okay, the regime of muscular work is always going to be that ATP PC system, which is alactic. Okay, so that your special exercise then should not turn into a lactic exercise where you're doing 15, 20 reps, because that's going to put us into a whole nother regime of work, and it's not closely related enough to the actual competitive exercise that we're trying to improve. The competitive exercise we're trying to improve in weightlifting and powerlifting is 1 rep, just a matter of a few seconds. Okay, that's all it's going to take to perform that rep. We don't need training outside of that. Takes us away from the specificity or the sport specific preparedness, which is the competitive exercise, and moves us down that scale. Being a special exercise, we want to be moving from the middle up, not from the middle down. Okay, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're looking at, what a special exercise is. Now let's start tying into why to use it and moving on from there, and we'll get into more details, practical and applied details as we go. Actually, first let's just give some special exercises for the squat, the bench, deadlift, clean and jerk, and snatch. Okay, special exercises for squat. Just look at your bar variations. That's the simplest way. Actually, let's take a little bit more. So, your actual squat, your competitive squat, are you raw or are you geared? Okay, from a geared standpoint, taking the gear away now makes that the regular squat a special exercise. I'm talking about a powerlifting style squat. Not necessarily the Olympic style with a very narrow stance or wider stance, sitting your hips back more. So from the geared squat, just a squat without gear, powerlifting style, same technique, but powerlifting style. Now we're moving into a special exercise. Put a box there, special exercise. I prefer 95 plus percent of squats to be done. It's for developing a squat to be done with a box. Okay, the box is just far superior in developing the strength needed to squat. If you're a raw squatter, you're going to want to take some more time away from the box, but still, the box is still the superior method for developing the squat. Okay, then look at your bar variations. You have a cambered bar, you have a safety squat bar, you have the buffalo bar. You could put a manta ray on the bar. All of those still involve similar kinematics, um, and they depending upon how you do them, those should all be main exercises in the workout. So your regime of muscular work should be the same. So now we've solved force production, accentuated region of force production would be the same. Dynamics of effort should be the same. Rate and time of force production should be the same. We've really solved all five of the principles of dynamic correspondence with just utilizing different bars or utilizing the box. We can also vary the height of the box. Okay, now the higher you go, we're starting to take away from some of those, like the amplitude and direction of movement. The amplitude of movement changes because you're decreasing the range of motion. Okay, so now we're losing a principle of dynamic correspondence. Doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, depending upon what you need as a lifter, but it does take away from how strongly related that exercise is to the competitive exercise. Okay, the same thing with going deeper. The deeper you go, the less correspondence it has to the competitive exercise. Okay, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean it isn't valuable. Maybe that's what you need in your training, depending upon your strengths and weaknesses. But just understand, as we change that range of motion, we're taking away principles of dynamic correspondence that, by doing that, means it's not as strongly correlated to the competitive exercise. Okay, and that's just something that to keep in mind. The more you change, the more you take away, and range of motion is one of those things. It changes the correlation. Okay. Bench press, board presses. Okay. Again, you're changing the range of motion. The more you change it, if you go up to a 5 board press for a raw bench, you're really changing that, taking away from how strongly it's correlated, versus a 2 or a 3 board might be very strongly correlated. Different bars. You have your Swiss bars, your cambered Swiss bars. You can bench with a cambered bar, with a reverse cambered bar. Reverse bands, with bands. Okay, these are all different things that you can add into as special exercises. Deadlift, pulling from blocks, pulling from deficit, RDLs, good mornings. Okay, look at the nature of the lift of an RDL. There's a lot of similarities, even though your legs are more stiff. There's still a lot of similarities in the hip extension and what's going on in your upper and lower back, as far as force production. Bringing your hamstrings in to a greater degree would correlate very strongly to the deadlift, and it would satisfy principles of dynamic correspondence. Clean and jerk. Just taking the jerk out and focusing on your clean, utilizing a power clean. Hang cleans. Okay, those are all special exercises for the clean. When you bring the jerk in, what about a clean to a push press, or a clean to a power jerk, or a push jerk instead of a split jerk? Special exercise for just the jerk. taking the bar out from the racks and doing a jerk. People like to throw the bar on their back and do a split jerk, taking the bar out of the rack, but then they can't split jerk anywhere close to that after having done a clean. Still a valuable exercise, but it changes the dynamics, which is why you can't lift which is why you can lift more coming out of the rack, especially if the bar's on your back. It changes the dynamics of the lift. Dynamics of correspondence. The more you change, it doesn't correlate as strongly, but still can be a very strong special exercise, provided it's filling your needs as a lifter. Okay. The snatch pulls, hang snatch, power snatch. Okay. Snatch balance. And you can see a lot of very similar kinematic. What are kinematics? Basically the aesthetics of the lift. A lot of similar kinematics fall with these exercises. The squat or the front squat. Reading, I forget who it was, several years ago, they were talking about whether they use the back squat or the front squat to improve the clean or the snatch. Which one had better correlation? But my instant thought was the weight of the back squat is so far from what you would be doing a snatch with that it wouldn't have as strong a correlation. Granted, it would be better to do an overhead squat, but what they looked at was, where is the location of the bar in relation to the lift? The back squat would be more similar to a snatch because of the location of the weight, versus a front squat would obviously fit the clean much better. So those would still fall as special exercises, loosely for the back squat to the snatch, pretty strongly for the front squat to the clean. But they would still fall as special exercises, even if you wanted to take the squat and say it's more developmental in nature versus supplemental. Okay, developmental being strengthening the muscles versus the technique, because the technique would be actually quite different, or enough different that you could make that distinction from a back squat to a snatch. Okay, let's move on from there. And why should special exercises be used? This one, I'm going to give two different reasons. I think it is fairly similar or fairly obvious, at least for the first one. The first reason would be to develop or build the competitive or classical exercise. Okay, so the classical exercises are essentially the competitive exercises, synonymous. So it's just going to improve or build those exercises, whether that be predominantly it would be from a technique standpoint or a technical standpoint. Could also be from an overload standpoint. If you remember back quite a few years ago, people would do walkouts to improve their squat. They do them right before a meet to overload their CNS or overload their nervous system. Therefore, their nervous system is kind of, think of it kind of like a computer almost, that it's registered for a 400-pound squat or a 500-pound squat because that's all you've ever done. But then you do walkouts with 550 pounds. Okay, now your nervous system is registered, oh, this doesn't feel as heavy when you get to that 500-pound squat because you just did walkouts with 550 pounds. So now your brain is telling you this is a much lighter lift. Okay, it's not simply just a mental trick. There is some science to that where you're actually overloading your nervous system. But there is some psychological benefits to that as well, just as far as what you feel. Would probably be a better fit in a conversation about heavy eccentrics. But I don't even know where I'm going right now. Anyway, The role of the special exercise is to build from a technical standpoint or a muscular standpoint, build the competitive or classical exercises. The second reason why we'd want to utilize special exercises is to strengthen weaknesses. Typically, generally speaking, when we're talking about strengthening weaknesses, we're looking at developmental exercises or general exercises. Going back to developmental special exercises, a glute ham raise, if you have weak hamstrings, a glute ham raise is going to build up your hamstrings so that they're more prepared to handle squatting or deadlifting or a clean. Um, Same with the triceps. You could do the same for the shoulders. You could just find exercises that build those muscle groups significantly and that will have a carryover to the competitive exercise. But strengthening weaknesses can also be done through those supplemental exercises. If you're weak in your back, let's say you're weak in your mid to upper back when you're squatting and you have a tendency to kind of hunch forward when you come out of the hole, utilizing a safety squat bar or a manta ray squat will help build the strength in your back to be able to stay more upright. So therefore, you're utilizing that supplemental special exercise to develop the strength that you need in the areas that you need it or where you're weak at for the competitive or classical exercise. Who should use special exercises? And there's probably some disagreement with me on this. I remember looking back at when I was starting out and I would read books and they would say, you shouldn't be performing this type of training until you have 2 years of strength training experience or 5 years strength training experience. And I was like, no way. I started doing this in the first year that I was training. Probably not a good thing. Following those books was probably better. You really want to tap into everything you can with the least amount of stimulation before advancing to more special means, okay, or more specific or specialized or intensity, high levels of intensity. You want to use as little as possible for as long as you can. So if I can bench press at 70% for 5 years and I make progress every single year, then I should keep benching at 70%. Okay? And this is a generic example, but I do it for year 6, I make progress. I do it for year 7 and I don't make progress. That's when I need to change. Now let's move up to 75 or 80%. Okay? And then go from there. Now, obviously, you're not going to train at only 70% for 5 years. That's kind of a ridiculous example, but hopefully you can get my point from that. I don't want to start specializing right away. This is where people go wrong with kids. They want their kids to be specialized in certain sports, especially soccer players, baseball players, especially pitchers, quarterbacks. There's a number of different sports that their parents want them to specialize right away. Wait, get a very broad development of sports and then specialize. The same is true for utilizing special exercises. Get as much out of the classic bench press, the classic squat, just the clean, before you start specializing and utilizing special exercises. So, utilizing special exercises is the main movement. And, Westside preaches that all the time. Rotate exercises. Don't ever squat. Don't ever bench, until either right before the meet, or they used to say at the meet. Don't ever throw on gear until at the meet. Don't ever put on a bench shirt and bench until at the meet. Don't ever perform bench press other than dynamic effort. Utilize special exercises all the way up to the meet, and then throw the shirt on and bench press at the meet. That's not good for beginners. Okay, the beginner lifter should be benching every time they have an upper body session. They should bench press every week, bench press. Sounds boring, but they should be trying to get as much as they can out of the bench. Then when their progress stalls, now start bringing in special exercises to develop the aspects of the bench that became weak through the years of training the bench press. By doing that, they will start making better progress, and they'll be able to continue it for a longer period of time. And only bring in a few special exercises, and then after a few years, progress starts to stall again. Then add new special exercises. Okay, and the same is true for the squat or the deadlift or the clean and jerk or the snatch. You be good at the main exercise, at the competitive exercise first. Once your progress stalls there, then start bringing in special exercise. I'm talking about the main movement here. I would say 7 to 10 years of training before you start to rely on special exercises as the main movement. 7 to 10 years. That's not a rule. Maybe progress stalls at year 5, but I don't know anyone. I mean, high school through college, that's 8 to 9 years. 10 years for some of the athletes that are a little unlucky. But 8 to 9 years, they can probably do bench press all the way through. Lifters too, not just athletes, lifters too, that 8 to 9 years before they really start to stall out and it becomes very difficult to make progress. That's the point you need to bring in those special exercises. Went through high school, went through college, you're finishing up college or starting to move beyond college and into, if you're trying to have an actual lifting career, that's when you need to start bringing in those special exercises, because that's when progress is going to start to slow down. Then you bring in special exercises and your progress takes off again. Now, that's the main exercise of the workout. That means you're not benching, you're not squatting, you're doing safety squat, bar squat, you're doing board presses for the main exercise. But for the supplemental exercise or the second exercise, second movement of the day, I would go ahead and start bringing in those special exercises as the second movement. You could probably start doing that right away. Think about it. Bench press first, then go to dumbbell bench. How many people do that? A lot, because dumbbell bench is, and keep it simple at the start. Dumbbell bench is a very good tool for improvement for a younger lifter. But once that lifter gets 10, 15 years in, dumbbell bench doesn't have very good carryover anymore. Okay, so then they need to change that exercise. Bench press to incline, bench press to overhead press. Your incline and your overhead press are special exercises for the bench. Those could be done as your second exercise right off the bat. Okay, look at Ed Coan's training, and I don't want to use his as a rule of training, because he had a very simple template of how he trained, and I don't think that that's best for everyone, but obviously it worked for him. Could it have been better if he had done something different? Who knows? We can't change the past, but that's not how I would continue to train people over time. But what did he do? He benched, he did incline, he did overhead press, and then he moved on to a few assistance exercises, rows or whatever, and then pull-ups, and then he'd be done. Stick to those basics. You know, your dumbbell bench, your dumbbell incline, your barbell incline, your overhead press. You can even throw in dumbbell overhead presses. Stick to those at first. Move on to the different special exercises later. You can bring some of those other things in, your board presses or whatever, but just don't do it too soon. Stick with your basics for a number of years. So I do think a second movement that resembles the bench in some way, everyone should be doing that. So you have two big movements, one being bench press, two being something similar, and then assistance work. As you progress, you just start bringing the special exercise into the first one. So instead of doing bench press, you're doing a board press, you're doing band presses or presses against bands, you're doing reverse bands, whatever. And then you're going on to a second movement, which is still strongly correlated to the bench, but not as strong as maybe as that first exercise was. The third group of people that should be doing special exercise is people that are doing rehab. You can utilize, let's say you can't bench to your chest because you strained your pec or tore your pec, but you can bench to boards. Maybe start out with a 4 or 5 board where it's a small range of motion, and you can still do that without being in too much pain or any pain. And then over time, you can start bringing that down, those boards down. Rely on your physical therapist or your athletic trainer to give you guidance on that. But that doing things of that nature, starting off with a high box squat and moving down to coming off of an ACL tear. Start with a body weight high box squat, then to a bar on a high box, and then you start bringing that box down as healing takes place. Again, rely on your physical therapist or your athletic trainer to give you direction on that, but that is a tool for special exercises when you're trying to come back to squat or to clean or to bench or whatever. All right, when should special exercises be used? And we got to look at this as a couple different directions. One is within the workout, okay? So if you're replacing the classical exercise with a special exercise, that exercise should go without saying be first. So if I'm going to replace full cleans with a power clean, I'm going to move that power clean to first in the workout. Okay, if I'm going to replace my squat with a safety squat bar box squat, that should be first in the workout. Okay, as the exercise becomes more developmental in nature, it's still supplemental. I want to clarify this. Still a supplemental, still resembles technique to a great degree, but just not as great as a safety squat bar box squat or a power clean to a clean or a board press to a bench. Then you would move it down to the second movement. Okay, so you might do a close grip board press following a JM press would follow some sort of press with the regular grip as the main exercise. It would follow it as a second exercise. RDLs would fit more into that second exercise slot versus the main exercise of the day. Hang cleans would fit, or clean pulls or clean high pulls would fit better into that second movement of the day rather than replacing cleans. Same with the snatch pulls, hang snatch, those would fit better as the second exercise versus the main exercise being a full snatch or a power snatch. Now if it's a developmental special exercise, such as the glute ham raises, such as the maybe your skull crushers, for squat or for your cleans and snatches, maybe you're squatting, that's gonna fall in maybe third or fourth on the list. I'd probably put it third on the list in most cases as far as its importance. Training my upper back, very important for my deadlift. Generally, my third movement on a deadlift day, I'm going to go some sort of strongly correlated deadlift first, maybe a front squat or an RDL or good morning second, and then third would be my pull-ups. Okay, I do horizontal pulling on bench days, vertical pulling on my squat and deadlift days. So my pull-ups or my maybe some heavy lat pulls would fall into that third exercise position. So your developmental gets moved down into the workout. Your supplemental should be number 1 and number 2, depending upon how strong the correlation. Okay, so now this is where this next one is how are special exercises performed? How do you implement them? How do you put them in? We got to look at this different ways, and it's hard to answer this question as far as how are supplemental or how are special exercises used, because you have to take into account the style of training that you use. Okay, do you train utilizing West Side methods? Do you train using block periodization? Do you train using linear periodization? Do you train using undulating periodization? The Bulgarian method, Shiko, or however you say his name. Smolov had a number of things out there. So, if depending upon what style of training you use or how you plan your training, that will depict in large part how you utilize your special exercises. Linear periodization is pretty much set up to only utilize the squat or the bench press or the clean and jerk or the snatch just in the nature. So then you wouldn't actually utilize a special exercise in that top exercise of the day. So then they would all fall to the second exercise. With West Side, you're rotating exercises every week. Block periodization, it depends on your interpretation of block and how you should do it, but you would still have it planned. I use my own version of block, which I adapted from a number of different sources. So I rotate exercises actually every day, every week, just like West Side. But the key with block periodization, and I think it should be with West Side too, and I think it's intended to be, although they admittedly do it differently, you should be picking your exercises. So if I'm 15, 20 weeks out from a competition, then my special exercises that I'm utilizing have a much lower correspondence than when I'm 3 weeks out from competition. And I personally would not utilize, very rarely, I shouldn't say I didn't, very rarely would I utilize the actual competitive exercise in training. Maybe once before a meet, maybe twice at most is kind of extreme. 3 times was pretty much unheard of. I was always utilizing special exercises, but the correlation or the correspondence getting close to a meet would be very high, versus far away from a meet would be fairly low, but still falling into that special exercise. It would still have correspondence. Okay. Depending upon what style of training you use, determines sets and reps. So if you're utilizing West Side, you're going to have a different special exercise every week, but you're also going to be doing max effort work almost every week. So you're doing singles, okay? Versus block periodization, your intensity early on is probably going to be lower, later is going to be higher. So implementing the sets and reps becomes, you kind of have to adjust that as you go, and it becomes difficult to know, and I can do a whole video just on this. It becomes difficult to know, okay, I'm utilizing 3 board press against mini bands this week, and I'm supposed to be at 80%. Well, 80% of what? especially if I haven't done 3-board press with mini bands in the past year. How do I get that 80%? And there is a way to do that. It just makes things a bit more complicated when I'm trying to talk about sets and reps and volume and intensity of special exercises, because the style of training that you use depicts a lot of that. But generally, if your special exercise is falling into the main exercise of the day, that would resemble just how you would train your bench press. So if you're training your bench press at 80% for 3 sets of 6, you would do no different with your special exercise. You just have to be able to figure out what that 80% is, which is doable. Like I said, it's doable. Just trying to have that conversation here when I haven't got into styles of training or how to select exercises makes it more difficult. The how becomes complicated, and that's what I'm trying to answer this as I go, and utilizing, even with Bulgarian training, to my knowledge, they perform the main exercise as max effort work every workout. Okay, they would clean and jerk as max effort, or they would at least just clean and then maybe jerk separately, but that would be done for max effort on a daily basis, not that they were necessarily working up to competition maximums, they were working up to training maxes. So let's say day 1 they cleaned 180 kilos, day 2 they cleaned 185, day 3 they may only clean 170. Okay, but that's with a very strongly correlated, almost competitive exercise. How would they put in special exercises? Probably be for more volume as the second exercise of the day. I remember their training doesn't really have space or time or a way of utilizing special exercises in a good way. You'd have to think your way through it as far as how you would utilize them, because that Bulgarian method of training was strongly built on utilizing the classical exercise, or very, very, very close to the classical exercise. Whereas Westside, which takes the max effort work, is basically comes from the Bulgarian method of training, where you lifting as much as you possibly can. But with Westside, you are going to rotate exercises every time, but you're only going to do that once a week. Once for the squat and deadlift, once for the bench, not every day. And that just changes how you think about what exercises or how to apply your special exercises to that training. Block periodization, linear periodization, you're pretty much only going to be benching and squatting as the main exercise, but the second exercise, I think I already said this, is where you would probably get more creative in utilizing special exercises. I think with a creative coach, they could find a way to utilize a special exercise as the main exercise, maybe a long ways off from training, where you're doing your hypertrophy work. You're starting with a 3-board, maybe do that for 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks of a 2-board, and then 3 weeks of a 1-board, and then 3 weeks off your chest going into the meet. That would be actually a very good linear path in both special exercises, and you could utilize intensity right along there with that. I actually think that would be a pretty interesting way to set it up if you were going to use linear periodization. I think in an undulating model, you could really do some good with this, because in an undulating model, you're going to have, let's say you're going to squat Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday, you could make be the most important day of the week, and that's going to be your highest intensity day, and you would squat. And then on Wednesday would be a medium intensity day, and you would do a safety squat bar or a manta ray. That's where you would toss in your special exercise, your safety squat bar, your manta ray, your cambered bar. And then on Friday, you would stick to, maybe you would toss in an Olympic style squat. Okay, so you would go just sit down nice and deep, strictly volume, really not, remember the medium intensity on Wednesday. Now Friday, lower intensity, strictly volume, more hypertrophy type training. And then on Monday, you're back to your squat being your heavy day. I'm just kind of thinking through this, how I would do it with each one of these models. I think it could be quite interesting in how you set it up. I definitely would advocate special West Side or block as the predominant methods of training for advanced athletes, but I think it could be a very interesting conversation looking at each one of those models and how to apply special exercises as the main exercise. Applying it as the second exercise is fairly, I think, straightforward. And the second exercise, you're gonna, when you're thinking sets and reps and you're thinking volume and intensity, you're generally going to have a little bit lower intensity for the second exercise. So if you're doing max effort work first, then the second exercise, you're going to follow that up with sets of 5, sets of 6. I'll even go up to sets of 8. If I'm doing dumbbell work, then I'll do up to sets of 20. So it kind of depends on the exercise that I'm utilizing. I'm not going to do heavy triples, and I do like to get up to heavy triples on my second exercise following whatever I did first. But that's going to be utilized with exercises that falls in line with more. Maybe my close grip board presses, my overhead presses, incline presses. With good morning, or my heavy front squats. I do like to do front squats as a special exercise for my deadlift. But when I get into my good mornings and my RDLs, things of that nature, I just really don't feel that they have a strong, that they dictate utilizing the super heavy weights. I'll go very heavy with them, but only for like sets of 5. Sometimes I do get into heavy triples with good mornings, but not a lot. I'll do it more if I'm doing good mornings off the pin. So you just have to look at the exercise. What does this exercise, what fits well with this exercise? As the second exercise, sets and reps, I'm looking to have a little bit more volume and not really taking it to the limit as far as max weight. And I'm stumbling over myself here because, like I said, I am just thinking through this as how everything would be applied depending upon the style of training. But as that second exercise pretty much can fit around the board as far as sets, depending upon your style of training, it's going to be similar, generally speaking, as far as sets and reps and as far as volume intensity. It's going to be higher reps or maybe even more sets, or maybe less sets depending upon what you're doing. Fewer sets than the main exercise, higher reps than the main exercise. So your volume may be a little higher because you're doing more reps per set, but maybe not depending upon how many sets you do. But your intensity will be lower, should be lower than the main exercise of the day. And again, selecting those exercises, it depends on where you're at in relation to the competition. Further from competition, less degree or less correspondence to the classical exercise. Closer to the competition, more correspondence to the special exercise. Now, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments. I will respond to you. If you like what you're seeing on this channel, you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button for the video as well. And then, of course, Please send this if you have friends, coaches, other lifters that would be interested in this. Please share it with them so they can start watching it and get on board as well. Till next time, I will see you later.